Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We are now finally ready to proceed on to session 1. And I would like to invite Professor Seung-Eun Cha to moderate this session for us. Professor Seung-Eun Cha is the Professor of Child and Family Welfare at Suwon University. So without further ado, let us begin.
Hello, welcome to join our session today. I'm so honored to be here as a moderator. I believe this is our second day of a grand journey of 2022 International Care Conference. The theme of this session is gender, development, young generation, and care. How do that connect? So we're going to start this session. I'm so proud to introduce you our 4 remarkable presentations and 4 brilliant discussants. Each presenter will spend about 15 to 20 minutes for the presentation, and after the 4 presentations have given, all 4 discussants, each of them will freely give a talk related to the gender development and the young generation issue for about 9 minutes. Then we can save our time, like 5 minutes, to spend additional discussion raised from the audiences. So if you have any question, please save it till the end of the session. And those who are joining the session through the online, please leave us your messages in the online chat room. So first, I would like to bring you our keynote speaker, Dr. Marina Durano, who is an advisor of a care economy and partnership engagement at the UNI, a Global Network International Global Union. And her keynote speech is about care economy in feminist development policies, prospect and forewarning. What an interesting title you have. Hello, Marina. Please step forward, and it's good to see you again. And let us give her a big applause to welcome her.
Change slides. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really very pleased to be here. So let me start with, September 27. Thank you. September 27, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the BMZ, announced that they will pursue a feminist development policy. This announcement, okay, let me move forward. This announcement came about 5 months after the Green Party's Annalena Baerbock, the country's first female foreign minister, made a commitment to feminist foreign policy, signaling a major shift in Germany's approach. I think I can read from here. BMZ Minister Svenja Schulze made very bold statements during her opening remarks, indicating that intentions that go well beyond listening. So at first Baerbock says we're happy to listen, but Schulze pushes this forward and says critically questioning our own structures and recognizing where misogyny, continuing colonialism, and racist ways of thinking have been entrenched. Now, these are not words to be said quite lightly by such a high-level foreign government official. Indeed, if Annalena Baerbock and Svenja Schulze are looking for a massive shift in foreign policy, then addressing any one of these 3 themes will rock the boat. I mean, enough to change its direction, if not actually change the boat itself, of what constitutes foreign policy. So this is key to answering our questions today. We first need to unpack this phrase, feminist foreign policy, and its relative, feminist development policy, which are all quite loaded phrases, that carry meanings, multiple meanings to these phrases. So let's start here, and let's see at what we already know. I'm sure that Baerbock and Schulze are trying to learn from the experiences of other countries who have claimed to pursue feminist foreign policy. It's a short and limited history. that we have on feminist foreign policy, and we have had a much longer experience analyzing and understanding official development assistance meant for gender equality. The Dutch, for example, have had a long experience improving upon their ODA support for gender equality, but the Dutch do not go to the extent of calling their aid policy feminist. So let's just be clear about that. In this limited history of feminist foreign policy, there's a whole set of criticisms which have been discussed elsewhere, so I will just review them here. So the first is that feminism is undefined, or vaguely defined, or narrowly defined. Actual practice appears to have a very narrow definition at best, and lies closer to identifying women and girls as beneficiaries of foreign policy or of foreign aid. Or some best practices are clear about priority issues that have been the focus of feminist and women's movements globally. These would be gender-based violence and harassment, sexual and reproductive health and rights, LGBTQI+ rights, and the women and peace security agenda are typically the themes that foreign aid actually funds. A second critique is practicing intersectionality, the lack of clarity about what intersectionality actually means in the context of foreign policy or development policy. Intersecting forms of discrimination and marginalization are not clearly defined, and with the exception of programs and funding towards LGBTQI+ as target group beneficiaries, not much goes beyond that. A third critique is the history of militarization and colonization that many feminists have claimed were ignored by the early practitioners of feminist foreign policy. For example, arms trade by Sweden and Canada has not been part of the discussion about defining what is feminist in Sweden and Canada's foreign policies. Which is quite an ironic thing, because the early days of implementation for the Swedish foreign policy actually specifically focused on women, peace, and security, broadly speaking, and particularly the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution number 1325, which encourages women's participation in the peace-building process. Another criticism is the disconnection between what goes on domestically in each of these aid countries and then how they pursue feminist foreign policy. For example, Mexico, which has high rates of gender-based violence and femicides, actually develops a feminist foreign policy without a clear resolution of how they will pursue feminism or women's rights inside their own country. So how is it possible that you are feminist on your external policy and not really feminist in your domestic policy? This is an important question for most practitioners in this field. So I do think that this disconnection is true for all countries that have declared feminist foreign policies, although I understand that Margaret Wallström, who coined the term feminist foreign policy when she was Sweden's foreign minister, claimed that at that point Sweden was a feminist government. So they actually said they were consistent. What has not been raised, and so I would add on to this list, is the inability of these feminist foreign policies and feminist development policies to confront global systemic issues from a feminist perspective, or at least to bring in a gender analysis to inform policymaking in the larger sphere of global economic governance. Systemic issues refer to the imbalances of economic power among nation states. In particular, it looks at macroeconomic imbalances, which, when left uncoordinated among nations, actually brings us to financial and economic crisis. There's been more than a few instances of this. So feminist critiques of the nature of the global economy, the macroeconomic policies pursued by central monetary authorities, by tax authorities, by trade ministries, and investment bodies have not found prominent space in these discussions about feminist foreign policy. So we actually have to ask why that is the case. This critique of mine is similar to my own analysis of official development assistance way back 2012 when I spoke at a gender in macroeconomics seminar at Ochanomizu University. Even as there was an interest in tracking aid allocations for gender equality with an acknowledgement that there are measurement issues, and even if there have been serious attempts at mainstreaming gender in several aid agencies, these were inadequate from a feminist standpoint. A feminist analysis must also look at the macroeconomic frameworks used to guide allocations, aid allocations, as well as the effect of macroeconomic policies the effect of aid flows on macroeconomic aggregates, especially for small receiving countries. So it's a two-way street there, but that seems to be missing. The result is that feminist alternatives are left untested, or unexplored, because there's like this missing component. This is not to say that there was never any attempt, but attempts at bringing feminist alternatives into the realm of macroeconomics have failed or fallen onto deaf ears. For example, the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on women's economic empowerment refused to publish a policy brief on gender and macroeconomics, even though a team of experts wrote the draft. In other words, women's economic empowerment has also tended to revolve around microfinance, entrepreneurship, and business leadership. Sometimes it's about cash transfer programs or local employment programs, but the macro is kind of not there, non-existent. Another example is a bilateral donor that put a stop to a publication of a policy brief on gender and fiscal policy that was produced by a multilateral agency. Supposedly because it contained non-mainstream recommendations. Now, I actually witnessed both these cases, so that kind of led me to think, okay, there's a resistance out there, for women to be in macroeconomic discussions or part of macroeconomic discussions. In contrast, the three multilateral institutions that are actually quite powerful in the global economic governance space have moved to increase their attention on gender equality. Most recently, we have had the IMF sharing their first gender mainstreaming strategy. This was not necessarily met with great joy, reflecting a high level of distrust, not only with the IMF, but with many other multilateral institutions who have made several declarations. So we still have to see how this will play out and have to see whether these three, the bank, the fund, and the World Trade Organization will actually bring about a feminist analysis of macroeconomic policies as they pursue their gender mainstreaming strategy. So even with these developments, I will claim that the highest levels of economic decision-making seem to continue to be close to women's, certainly to feminist participation at this point. That seems to be where we are. And this is where I think we can begin to explore whether and how a care economy can shift the way we think about feminist foreign policy and feminist development policy, especially because at least the CTMS has already managed to link care economy with macroeconomics. So the question is, can we raise the level of influence to other spheres? What is the promise of care economies for feminist foreign policy, for feminist development policy? When Germany hosted the G7 meeting this year, the care economy actually took prominent place in the discussions. Care economy was one of the main themes that was included in the consultation process for Germany's feminist development policy. Germany seems to be following Mexico and France's lead on this theme. Both countries hosted the Generation Equality Forum in 2021 that led to the formation of the Global Alliance for Care. As part of this alliance, Canada announced a $100 million Canadian dollar commitment for the next 5 years to support these efforts, and it held the first community of practice meeting last week, or 2 weeks ago by now. And so the interest is clearly there. What is different about the care economy, or why do we think it will be different? Why is it worth investing in? Well, this is where the promises really lie as far as the care economy is concerned. One, it challenges the assumptions of mainstream economics, thereby engaging it in a debate as a field of inquiry and as a policy arena. It has a different set of economic goals and motivations, social provisioning for well-being, for example. And it can propose a different configuration of institutions or how society will organize itself. And it's this last part I will focus on as particularly interesting if we were to look into structural changes or transformative changes as demanded by feminists. This last part actually connects back to the criticism of feminist foreign policy as currently disconnected from domestic policy. We can imagine structural change using a care diamond, look at how we can shift the responsibilities for care across different institutions. So on that side, you will see Professor Emiko Ochai's analysis of Thailand and Taiwan's care economy. And the question is, in what way the shape of this diamond will change if really institutional change will happen post-care economy. Or we can also imagine structural change from this hierarchy of economic activities. We can ask whether a care economy would change, what is more important? Will social reproduction be more important? Will natural regeneration be more important compared to, say, finance or production? With new configurations, what kinds of outcomes, what changes to opportunities will arise? Will these changes affect the configuration of global economic governance, if not national governance? I began to look at this question a year or so ago, trying to break down the question into finer detail, knowing that global governance covers so much more than the macroeconomics of things. I imagine that these themes will also be reconfigured if a care economy framework is used to analyze these issues. Remember that these are themes also that ODA funds. As exciting as it may sound to test how much a care economy could improve the way we live and the way we govern, the current political conjuncture is somewhat fraught. The economics of the day is almost a 1980s redux with high interest rates and heavy indebtedness for many countries. Democracy has a tenuous hold in many nation states, and the backlash against progress in women's rights is very strong, even as women's movements are holding ground against anti-gender movements. I'm therefore not surprised that there is a high level of suspicion attached to proclamations of gender mainstreaming and feminist appeals at the highest levels of decision-making in arenas that were previously inaccessible. Feminists are pushing back, raising issues of pinkwashing, that is using gender equality as a way to hide some ugly truths about the world today. This is the forewarning. We finally gained the recognition after decades of demands to look into the care economy with serious consideration. But the opportunity arose when the world was already on fire. I mean, it still is, in a way. So much is being asked from a concept and notion that has been repressed for so long. When Annalena Baerbock says she's listening, when Svenja Schulze says this time will be different, I wonder if there's any sense of what is actually realizable. And this is where my discomfort lies. The care economy is treated as another one of those trending themes that have characterized official development flows. One day it's aid effectiveness, another day it is refugees, and yet another day it is UN system reform and so on. There is really a mad scramble out there to control the narrative over what is a care economy. But care economies are radical. For care economies to deliver on its radical potential, we need to create the institutions that have the capacity to realize this potential. And this is where our dilemma is at the moment. Can feminist foreign policy or feminist development policy create care economies? I mean, is that the case? Mexico, France, and Germany seem to think so. Given the criticism that countries with feminist foreign policies actually do not have feminist domestic policies, do we first need to create feminist states to ensure alignment of domestic and foreign policy? In other words, do we first need to build feminist states, then pursue feminist policies, both domestic and foreign? Is this do we have things the other way around? Do we need a feminist state to build care economies? It's a gigantic question. I think we've never really faced this question before. And in the end, what does a feminist state look like if the answer is yes? And just to make things extremely complicated, what do our theories of development have to say about feminist states? For example, in the case of developmental states, weak states, corrupt sex democratic states, welfare states, all these kinds of states, what can we learn from that in terms of defining eventually a feminist state that delivers on care economies? It's all questions up in the air. And so this is really where I have come so far. No, I've come with questions rather than answers, and that as I continue to push for the takeoff of care economy, I end up spending more and more time thinking about the configuration of a feminist state capable of building care economies and sustaining them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your lecture. I was very impressed that you mentioned that it is critical to balance the macro and micro level policies with the feminist viewpoint, and the care economy actually can do that.